Hari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Jaya Giri Varadhari Jaya Giri Varadhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Jaya Giri Varadhari Jaya Giri Varadhari Jaya Yashoda Nandana Jaya Braja Jana Ranjana Jaya Yashoda Nandana Jaya Braja Jana Ranjana Jaya Yamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Kunja Vihari 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 Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jai Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Radhe Jaya Prabhupada 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 Srila Prabhupada Shri Radha Madhav ki Jai Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Welcome everyone to our second class on the Bhagavad Gita, and it's very nice to see all of you again. I'm going to share my screen so all of us can chant the, prayers to the spiritual master. We'll begin each time with these. These are the famous prayers that Srila Prabhupada has put at the introduction of the Bhagavad Gita. And by the end, all of us should know these by heart. These are not part of your official list of verses, but they're very important verses. I will send you actually your official list of verses via email today or tomorrow for the whole Bhagavad Gita. So you can start preparing in advance. Starting chapter 2, you'll have memorization verses and forward. But you don't have to do them all at once. I'm just sending them to you so you have them in advance. So we'll start with this. Om Jnanam Timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadammayam Dati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavansha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitangsha. He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Deenabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanustate Pranamami Hari Priye Panchakalpatarubhyascha Kripasindubhya eva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So these prayers are actually prayers uh, primarily to the spiritual master. So without the mercy of the spiritual master, we cannot get Krishna. So we always pray to the spiritual master to please enlighten our study of the Bhagavad Gita. So here is chapter 2. Many of you have been very uh, prudent in completing your chapter 1 homework. Thank you very much for sending it to me. Whenever you send me your homework, I will reply with, uh, sort of confirming that I've seen it and I've, noted it. And so if by chance, if you don't receive a reply from me in a week's time, then make sure to resend a note or something, just in case if I miss it. I don't think I will miss it at all, but in case you have not received a reply from me, that means somehow it got missed, or I sent like an email mass message to everyone, but then it never reached everyone. So sometimes also emails get lost in transmission. So if you don't receive a reply from me, then that means something got lost, either in cyberspace or somehow in my email. And so please send it again. So all of you who sent your homework by yesterday should have received a response from me. If you didn't, then please do that. The other thing that I sent to you was I sent you the registration form for the Bhakti Shastri and the letter of recommendation. These two things need to be completed by those devotees who would like to take the exam. If you're just taking the classes and you are, warming yourself up, you don't have to get those things done. But if you do want to take the exam, then you need to fulfill uh, those two documents and send them to me. And the homework is very, very important because the exam and the questions in the exam will come from the homework. So that's why it's very important that you take it seriously. And once you're behind, it's very hard to catch up, my personal experience. So don't think, I'll do it next week and I'll do 3 chapters. I do each chapter every week. And again, as we said last time, the most important part of the homework is to read the chapter. So keep up with your reading and answering the questions. The whole thing should take about 2 hours, 2 or 3 hours. So it's very reasonable, and this way you'll be up, you'll be on target. You'll be moving nicely. If you have any other questions, just email me or text or on WhatsApp, and I can answer those. I'll start with the presentation on chapter 2, and then after that, I'll open it up to questions, and then you can ask me questions on chapter 2 and also chapter 1 if needed. But primarily today we are going to focus on this.
Haribol Prabhu,
Hare Krishna.
quick question. Prabhu, is this recording going to be available for everyone later on, like last time?
Yes. So each week we share the recording and it's uploaded on YouTube. One of our devotees on this call, Andrew, he's very expert on this and he's doing that. Andrew, are you saying you can record? Yeah, let's put up the recording afterwards. So it'll be on YouTube after the class so that this way we can see it if needed. But at the same time, I'm also sometimes very hesitant to upload recordings. The reason is because if the recording is there, then students feel, oh, I don't need to come to class. And I don't like to encourage that. Like even my university classes, oftentimes I won't give recordings or PowerPoints because then people think, oh, I'll just watch the recording later on. But it's not the same. It's not the same when you can ask questions in between and you're part of a group. So we will make the recording available, but it's important to be on the Zoom call, so it's interactive.
Yes, absolutely, Prabhu. My question wasn't so much for the attendance. I mean, it wasn't in regard to be attending the class or not, and just looking at the recording later on. It's just to refer back or look back into the recording and listen to some important points if need be.
Okay.
And strangely, I've not been receiving emails, Prabhu. Can someone add me to it?
So are you on the WhatsApp group, Prabhu?
I'm not on the WhatsApp group also. My wife is, but I'm not.
Okay. So if she's on there, then on the WhatsApp group, we shared a Google spreadsheet. And thank you actually for bringing this up. This is for everyone. There's a Google spreadsheet. And every time I send an email, I take the emails from the Google spreadsheet. So please, if your email is not there, please add your details on there, including your phone number. And then if you're on that sheet, then we'll add you to the WhatsApp and the email. So it's very simple for everyone.
Thank you.
Just that's you. Everyone can edit that sheet. So just add your information there, and then we'll add you.
Thank you, Prabhu. Haribol.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. I have one more question.
Yes.
This is my first class. I missed the last one. So where I can get the questions to be answered?
So yeah, just add yourself to that Google spreadsheet, and then I'll send you everything. Whatever you've missed, I will send you that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
So last time we ended with what is known as Arjuna Vishad Yoga. And we saw that how Arjuna had five arguments against not fighting. You all remember this and you've all worked on this in your homework. These 5 arguments were arguments based upon compassion, destruction of family traditions, incurring sin, no pleasure, only suffering, and the 5th one, which we find in chapter 2, indecision. Arjuna does not want to fight due to these reasons. He's saying fighting is not compassionate. Fighting will only bring us suffering. There will be no happiness. It will destroy family traditions, and most of all, we will incur sin by engaging in such ghastly warfare. So all of these arguments against the fight, against war, are very genuine. They're very true. If only our leaders today had the same vision that Arjuna does. And this is why on many occasions in chapter 1, also in chapter 2, in the purports, Srila Prabhupada explains how this is the vision of a great personality, a great realized soul like Arjuna. And how because he had this mindset, therefore he was in the right mindset to receive the instructions of Bhagavad Gita. There, he was in the right mindset to actually be able to understand the instructions of the Bhagavad Gita. The specific words that Srila Prabhupada uses is soft-hearted. His soft-heartedness became his, in some sense, his eligibility for understanding Krishna's message. Now in chapter 2, Krishna is particularly responding to the first one, to all four. We'll see he responds to all four, but particularly he's responding to Arjuna's argument of compassion. Because Krishna wants to encourage compassion. At the same time, he wants Arjuna to fight. And so it's a very subtle discussion. It's a very subtle point, as we'll see. And therefore, Krishna is spending so much time in this chapter to respond to Arjuna's argument of compassion. And so we'll see how chapter 2 goes about doing this. But very important, make sure to understand this, that these 5 arguments that you see here on this slide, this is the catalyst for the Bhagavad Gita. This is the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita. This is why Krishna's discussion is so relevant, because of these questions that Arjuna raises. So chapter 2 is entitled by Srila Prabhupada, Contents of the Gita Summarized. You see chapter 2 at every page up on the Gita, it says Contents of the Gita Summarized. Now, when I used to read, I used to think, well, Srila Prabhupada, or it's written Contents of the Gita Summarized, but really it's not such a summary. It's more just, it's Krishna's talking about the soul. It's very basic philosophy. It's just the introduction. Krishna speaking about the soul, the difference between the soul and the body. But when you read chapter 2 again and again and read the Gita over time, then you actually come to realize that chapter 2 is the Gita summarized. It is the entire Gita in one chapter. It's the summary of that Gita. And therefore, Srila Prabhupada's words are not spoken lightly. He hasn't just said contents of the Gita summarized, but really it's not a summary. This chapter, in some sense, is the most important chapter of the Gita. It's the summary of the entire Gita. And if we can just understand this chapter, we can go back home, back to Godhead. Because in this chapter, Krishna takes us, Srila Prabhupada takes us from the most basic knowledge of the difference between the body and the soul, all the way to liberation, the last verse of this chapter, as you will see when you read it. So this is a quote from Srila Prabhupada's purport for 272. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur has summarized this second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita as being the contents of the whole text. In the Bhagavad Gita, the subject matters are Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga. In the second chapter, Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga have been clearly discussed, and a glimpse of Bhakti Yoga has also been given as the contents for the complete text. So, Srila Prabhupada, when he says something, he's always quoting a Vaishnavacharya, and he's quoting Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who's saying that this is the entire contents of the Bhagavad, of the whole text. And it's so important. All of our distresses, our lamentations, our difficulties can actually be solved by the second chapter. If we just deeply understand its teaching. These verses are so deep. Krishna's instructions are so powerful. As devotees, I can attest to this, we sometimes want to go to greater, more confidential texts, like the Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, and definitely we should. But we sometimes think that Gita is very basic, very simple, and especially chapter 2. But these verses are so deep. So Prabhupada here is a lecture that he gave in London. He says this very point that we were discussing about Arjuna's compassion. Arjuna was overwhelmed with compassion. Duryodhana had no such feelings. Why the contrast? Arjuna is a devotee, ready and willing to excuse his enemies. Even if devotees excuse those who insult them, Krishna takes a different position, and he is strict on this matter. Krishna will not excuse or tolerate any insult to his devotees. If we want to please Krishna, we must never insult his devotees, and we have to be prepared to kill so-called relatives when this is Krishna's plan. So Srila Prabhupada's quotes on these in this section is so important. They're so wonderful, and there's so many of them. It's hard to decide which ones to choose, which ones not to choose. But in this one, Srila Prabhupada is describing that the Gita is a very, this chapter is very difficult, very crucial, because imagine if you're having a conversation with someone. Imagine this scene. You're having a conversation with someone. And at the end of that conversation, you have to decide whether or not to fight with and kill your relatives, whether or not to fight and kill millions of people. And that decision depends on that 1 hour conversation. That conversation is the Bhagavad Gita. So Arjuna, he is a great devotee, and therefore, he's full of compassion. Yet, his being a devotee also means that he has to abide by Krishna's plan. He has to understand Krishna's plan and abide by it. And at the same time, not do the wrong thing, not act out of his false ego. Because as devotees, we also have to be non-violent, something that we'll speak about, something that we'll discuss soon. So on one hand, Arjuna must be non-violent. On the other hand, he should follow Krishna's plan. How to do both? And this is chapter 2. So Arjuna was not a coward. He was a competent warrior. But still, Dehatma Buddhi, the bodily concept of life, is so strong that Arjuna admits, Drishva tu swajanam Krishna. My dear Krishna, I have to kill my own men. Own men means this bodily relationship. Why are others not own men? Everyone is own men because everyone is Krishna's son. So when one becomes Krishna conscious, he can see everyone as own men. And when he is not Krishna conscious, he simply sees own men where there is bodily relationship. This is the defect. Srila Prabhupada here is saying how Arjuna's compassion was glorious, yet it was misplaced. Because he was concerned with the fact that the people he was fighting with were his own men, were his own relatives. And he was not harboring the same affection, the same concern for all living entities. And therefore, although his compassion was glorious, it was still incomplete. It was compassion due to the bodily relationship. It was attachment due to the bodily relationship. And although compassion is glorified, in this chapter, Krishna, by teaching the science of the soul, is trying to get Arjuna to re-channel his compassion towards the soul, towards every person, rather than simply his relatives. And for many of us, this is a very important lesson. Again, we see how the Gita is so relevant to our lives, because even as devotees, day and night, we think about our family. We're concerned for the well-being of our family. We're concerned about the well-being of our kinsmen, our friends, our relatives, people related to us. But Krishna here is saying, this is not right. You must see everyone, your family or not your family, as a soul, and relate with them with the same affection, same understanding as though they were your own family. There's actually one very nice statement that Srila Prabhupada makes where he says that this is the meaning of sannyas. So sannyas is something that is very difficult. To become a sannyasi is very glorious. And it's a life that is very harsh. Right? This life of a sannyasi is very austere. No family relationships, no comfort that we get in our family life. But Prabhupada says, on the other hand, sannyas life does not mean to be without family. A sannyasi also has a family. But the difference is, he says, now the family is the entire world. The sannyasi's own family is the entire world. So his family expands. It's not that it decreases, it expands. And Srila Prabhupada said this about his own life. He said, for me, he said, taking sannyas, Prabhupada, the exact words that he uses, he says, I was horrified when my Guru Maharaj came in my dream and asked me to take sannyas. I was horrified. How could I leave my family, my loving wife, my children? Prabhupada had very nice children. And he had a very, good family situation. Some problems are there, like are everywhere. But Prabhupada says, I was horrified. But he says, but now I see that actually my Guru Maharaj was actually giving me thousands of sons and daughters. And then he points to the audience of devotees and he says, all of you are my sons and daughters. So for the devotee, for the sannyasi, every person is a member of their family. And Arjuna's hesitation is partly due to his attachment to his family members. And that is the consciousness that Krishna clarifies or fixes. He brings him back in the right state of mind. He speaks to Arjuna about resolute determination. This is the last point that I want to do before we get into the actual topics. In text 41, he tells that to understand this philosophy and to follow this path of devotion, one has to be resolute in their determination. And I put this here in the beginning because I thought it will also be a nice introduction for our own class to get through this class. We have to be focused in mind, resolute in our determination. So Krishna here has two verses that are very key. The first one is Neha Vikramanashu Asti Pratyavayu Navidyate Swalpamapyasya Dharmasya Trayate Mahato Bhaya. He says, in this endeavor, there's no loss or diminution. A little advancement on this path can protect one from the most dangerous type of fear. And then in the next verse, Krishna says, Vyavasayatmika buddhi ekeha kurunandana bhushaka hyanantasha dayo vyavasayanam. And this verse is one of the most important verses of the Gita. Krishna says, those who are on this path are resolute in purpose, and their aim is one. O beloved child of the Kurus, the intelligence of those who are irresolute is many-branched. So when we study the Bhagavad Gita, our mind we should hear and study with rapt attention, with resolute determination, in the way that Arjuna was listening, as though after reading the Bhagavad Gita, we will face a situation of life or death. We are not armchair philosophers. We have to read this like our life depends on it. Like Madhava Prabhu, he's a very famous Kirtaniya in our society. He says that we should chant the Mahamantra as though this is our last breath. And then we will chant with full attention. Many times when we're chanting, our mind is going everywhere. And we're talking and chit-chatting with our family members. But he says a nice meditation, a nice way to focus our mind and concentrate while chanting is to think that after chanting this mantra, I may live or I may not live. This mantra, let's say it's my last breath, and chant with that sincerity and intensity. In the same way, when we read the Bhagavad Gita, we should read it thinking that this may be my last breath. And so, am I reading with that determination, with that sincerity, with that seriousness? And Arjuna is the best example. I've written this here because in the same lecture, Prabhupada describes how when Arjuna was a small child, and this is actually, this is in your study guide, he was the student of Dronacharya. He was in the Gurukul with all the other little boys from the kingdom, all the princes, the plural of prince. I have always struggled saying that word. So he was there, and all the students were there, and um, when Arjuna was studying in the camp of Dronacharya, in the Gurukul of Dronacharya, then he wanted to be Dronacharya's best student because he was a great devotee. He was just very good at whatever he did. And Dronacharya also deeply loved Arjuna. Now, Prabhupada says that in the Gurukul, there were, attendants of the school, and Dronacharya had told one of the attendants that never let Arjuna eat in the dark. In Vedic culture, eating in the dark is not considered good. You can't see what you're eating. There might be a bug in there, and you eat the bug accidentally. So he told this attendant, don't let Arjuna eat in the dark. So there's always a lamp that would be there when Arjuna would eat at night. As young boys and warriors, they would feel hungry and sometimes eat at night. And there's various variations of this story. Some people say that Bhima was eating at night. So whoever was eating at night, someone was eating at night. And when they were eating, then Arjuna noticed that the lights have gone out, yet I'm able to eat. And when I'm able to eat, then even though I cannot see the food still goes in my mouth. And therefore, I don't need light to eat, because even your hands have eyes. And so he said, if my hands have eyes and I can eat at night, then that means I can also practice at night. I can also practice archery at night. And then what did Arjuna do? He started practicing at night his archery. While all the other students were sleeping, he was up awake, practicing. And therefore, he stopped sleeping. He gave up sleeping altogether. And therefore, one of his names is what? Gudakesha, one who has overcome sleep. And that's why he got the name Gudakesha, one who has overcome sleep. And due to his resolute determination in becoming the world's best archer, Arjuna became Dronacharya's favorite student, and he became the best archer in the world, the best warrior. So in the same way, Prabhupada says, if we want success in spiritual life, we must have the same resolute determination as Arjuna. Day and night, our mind is one focused. It's not many branched. And if we observe successful people in this world, this is the quality that they have. They choose one thing to do, and they do it very well, with full focus and with full resolution. Srila Prabhupada writes that it was after reading this verse, text 41, Srila Prabhupada got the determination at the age of 70 to follow his instructions, the instructions of his spiritual master, and come to America. It was this verse, actually. Then he came to America because he understood that the instruction of my guru is there. Now I should be fully focused and fulfill that instruction. Doesn't matter, life or death. I should go to America. My Guru Maharaj told me if I have money, if I have time, I should go and preach in the West, in the English language. And so that's what I'm going to do. So for us, our resolute determination is in following the instructions of the spiritual master. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur also explains it in this way, that here, the primary instruction here that Krishna is giving is that we have to fulfill the instruction of the spiritual master. So this is just on this verse, a very important verse on the Bhagavad Gita. This chapter. So in this chapter, Krishna focuses on the first theme of the Bhagavad Gita, which is the Atma, or the self. And this is a very essential, important topic relating to, as I mentioned, to Arjuna's state of mind and to the basic teaching of the Gita, which is, who am I? Who am I? All perfect knowledge begins with this understanding. Who am I? A person can only understand the world when they first understand who they are, who the observer is. So Arjuna can only have clear mind until he understands who he is and who others are. What is the nature of the self? This is the question of the self um, that has challenged philosophers of all ages, of all time. It's the most fundamental question. Descartes famously said, "I think, therefore I am." All the great scientists, philosophers, all the great people of this world, they are trying to answer this very same question. The Nobel Prize-winning chemist Albert Grigori, he remarked, "In my search for the secret of life, I ended up with atoms and electrons, which have no life at all. Somewhere along the line, life ran out through my fingers. So in my old age, I am now retracing my steps." So in terms of understanding what is the self, the Gita is presenting a very distinct philosophical idea of what the Atma is. And we need to understand the Gita's understanding in contrast to other understandings of the self. To understand what is the Gita's understanding of the soul, we must understand other conceptions. What is it not teaching? So there's four main theories in terms of what is the self. One theory, which actually Krishna touches upon in the second chapter, is called materialism, which means that we are just matter, we're just chemicals. We're chemicals just like tables and chairs, just like computers, and just like the earth, the inanimate matter. We're simply made of chemicals. And in the Gita, in the second chapter, Krishna clarifies, he tells Arjuna this point. He says how even if you believe that there's no soul, then he says, what is the cause for lamentation? Because no one laments when a bag of chemicals is destroyed. So there's no reason for lamentation if we're not the soul. And this is the viewpoint of materialism, which says that we're just mulch, right? We come from mulch and we become mulch after death. Then another theory of the self is called non-reductive physicalism. This means that everything in this world is material, but somehow from this materialism, from this material combinations, something like a mind or soul manifests. Through the interaction of chemicals, we get something like a soul. So everything at its basis is matter, but from that matter and the interaction of the matter, we get a soul. The third theory is called holistic dualism. This is a dualism which means that there's body and soul. But this viewpoint says that we are a combination of spirit and matter. We are not just spirit or just matter, but a person is a combination of soul and matter, both things. And the final viewpoint, which is the Gita's viewpoint, is called radical dualism, which says that the soul and the body are two separate things, and we are 100% soul with a body. And this is very key because even myself, initially I had the misunderstanding where I thought, well, we are Atma, but we're also the body. Or we're both Atma and body. No, we're 100% a soul with a material body. This is called radical dualism. The Atma is the person, and the soul is just like a vehicle or a garment. And Krishna makes this point, Vasang Sijirnani Yatha Vihaya, that we change bodies like we change garments. This is how distinct the soul is from So just to review this very quickly, unlimited materialism is where a person says that there's nothing like a soul, there's nothing like a mind. We are simply a combination of fibers and chemicals and cells. Like a famous materialistic philosopher, Daniel Dennett, he says, it would make life simpler for us if you would in the future say, my C fibers are firing, instead of saying, I am in pain. We're just chemicals. Non-reductive physicalism says the person is a physical organism whose complex functions, both in society and in relation to God, give rise to higher human capacities, such as morality and spirituality. So this is also a variation of materialism, which says that the basis of this world is matter, but from that matter come mental or spiritual capacities. The third one is holistic dualism. The person is a composite of separate parts, soul and body, but the person is the combination of the two. He must be identified with the whole, whose normal function is as a unity. This is also not our philosophy. This is actually the viewpoint of very famous religious traditions like Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. In Christianity and Judaism and Islam, they also believe in the soul, but they are holistic dualists. And this is why we're making the distinction. They also say that we're soul, but they believe we are soul and body. And in order for the soul to function, it must have a body, a material body. But we don't say this. And the last one is called radical dualism. And this was also present in Western philosophy. And Descartes, he says that we are a combination of mind and body. So they are dualists, but then they say, well, what is the soul? When we say soul, what do we mean? And Descartes said, we mean the mind. And so therefore we have the mind, which is us, which is the soul. The mind and the soul are the same. And the body is different. The body changes, and the body is physical. So, and the mind is identifying with the body. And the argument that Descartes made for radical dualism against materialism is that the body changes. He made a very similar argument to what Krishna, as we will see, makes in the Gita, and Srila Prabhupada also makes, that the body changes, but we still are the same person, right? Body changes, but I'm still the same person. So if the body changes and I'm still the same person, then I cannot be the body. Because what is the continuing element amongst all these bodies? That is me. And that, Descartes says, is the mind. Me, the mind. The problem with what Descartes says is very simple. A person's psychological traits, their memory, behaviors, emotions, etc., change over time as well. In fact, our mental states change even faster than our physical states, right? Our body, it's hard to see the change at every moment. Of course, over the course of 20 years, I can say, well, before I was, a child, and now I'm an adult. And so my physical body has changed. But in terms of our mind, every few minutes, our mind changes completely. So how can we say that the mind doesn't change? So although Descartes argued his philosophy of dualism, he was not very successful. He was not very successful because he thought that the mind is the soul. And people said, well, this just doesn't make sense. How can you say that the mind doesn't change? Yes, this is a problem that the body changes, but the mind also changes. So everything changes. So we're back in the same problem. There's nothing the same or eternal about us. So nevertheless, Descartes' idea was not that well received, although it's a very popular philosophy. He's a very famous philosopher also, because of these mistakes. But nevertheless, he was a dualist, and so therefore his philosophy comes very similar to Bhagavad Gita's philosophy. He believed in substance dualism, that there's two substances fundamentally. There's matter as one substance, and there's spirit or soul as another substance. And he believed in indirect realism, which means that we don't directly perceive the world. The world is real, but we don't directly perceive it. We perceive it through the body. Just like, which is a fact, we also say that the soul doesn't directly, is not directly in contact with the objects of the senses. Like when I'm touching this computer, I'm not touching it. My body is touching it, but I'm touching it through the body. So that's called indirect realism. So Descartes believed in substance dualism, means two separate things, and also indirect realism. Now the Gita has the same idea of dualism, but it solves Descartes' question. It solves his problem, his challenge, where the Gita says, yes, the Gita is also a dualistic tradition, but it actually divides that dualism into three parts. There's the body, there's the mind, and there's also the soul. Yeah. Now, why is this a dualism? It's a dualism because the body and the mind are in one category. They're both material, and the soul or the Atma is in a separate category. But it doesn't face the same problem as Descartes because the Gita does not identify the soul as the mind. It says they're two separate things. And the mind here is a subtle material element that changes according to our consciousness and according to our our particular state. But it is the soul that actually identifies with the mind. Just like we say, just to think about this, in our day-to-day life, we say, today I was feeling angry. Or we say, I know I shouldn't attend this meeting because my mind will become disturbed. So if we are the mind, then how can we reason with the mind? Right? We have to be different than the mind. Therefore, we can actually control our mind. Therefore, we can recognize our mind, and therefore we can decide what our mind does. And because the mind changes and the body changes, it can't be us, because those things are constantly changing. What is us? It's the Atma, or the soul. The only problem with this, someone may say, is that, well, if the soul is not the body and it's not the mind, then what is the soul? If it's not a thinking, feeling, willing thing, if it doesn't have desires, if it doesn't feel angry or happy, then how can we speak of it in terms of these ways? And the soul or the Atma is, essentially qualityless. How do we define it? And therefore, the Bhagavatam describes us, it goes in more detail. It describes that the soul is actually a spiritual person, in a non-reducible, irreducible spiritual person. And this soul identifies with the mind and the body. The spiritual soul has spiritual senses, it has spiritual thoughts, it has a spiritual, all the sensory functions are there. But that spiritual soul identifies with the material mind. It's like a glove on the soul. And because it identifies with the material mind, and those thoughts, feelings, and things are continuously changing, therefore, the mind changes, but the soul does not. And like clothes, like Krishna's giving the example of the clothes, the spiritual mind is covered by the material mind. And self-realization means when that material mind is purified, meaning that we shed that material mind and we're using only the spiritual mind. And the only difference is that while the soul and while the mind and the body can change and are therefore can be divided into parts, The soul is irreducible. It's a fundamental spark. It's a fundamental living being that cannot be reduced to further parts. And therefore, although we say that the soul thinks, feels, and wills, these are qualities of the soul, these are attributes of the soul itself is indivisible. It is irreducible. And therefore, Krishna in the Gita describes the qualities of the soul in these ways. That though the soul has qualities, it is still irreducible. It is unbreakable. This is a little bit of a technical question, technical issue, but I will we'll come back to this. So the basic point being that in this life we're changing bodies, therefore we're not the body, because the body changes, but we're still the same person. In this life, our mind also changes, therefore we're not the mind, we're the soul. And we're the Atma, or the soul, is eternal and fundamentally unchangeable. Although the soul's desires may change, but those desires are attributes of the soul. They are not separate from the soul. So the material mind is covering the soul. It vanishes, but the soul itself does not change. The soul itself remains the same. With purification, the glove is removed, but the hand always remains the hand. It always remains the same. I'll take more questions at the end once we finish this. And so then, as the last point, Krishna then describes this process of reincarnation. And the philosophy of reincarnation is described in this very important verse, which is, one of the key verses of the second chapter. Dehinosmin yatha dehe kaumaram yovanam jara tatha dehantara prapti dhirasatra namo. As the embodied soul continuously passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. A self-realized soul is not bewildered by such a change. So here, Krishna is giving a very important argument for the existence of the soul, a very fundamental argument for the existence of the soul. He's saying that in this body, we've already changed so many bodies. And therefore, this image here is a very famous image that goes along with this verse, particularly this verse that Srila Prabhupada and the BBT always put in every Gita. Prabhupada says every 7 years, every single cell in our body changes. And now modern science says every 10 years, even the brain cells in the body change. But we are still the same person. A nice way to explain to people this argument is that you show them this picture and you ask them how many bodies are here. And then they'll count, they'll say, well, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. There's 14 bodies here. Okay, there's 14 bodies. How many bodies are here? There's 14. Then you ask, how many people are there? Well, how many people are there? There's one person. There's one person, but there's 14 bodies. So therefore, the body should be different than the soul. And then if the body is changing, the Gita says, and we are the soul, then that means even in this life, we are changing bodies. But because that change happens only very gradually, we don't notice it. We don't think that we're changing bodies, but actually we are. And so therefore, what we call death is just a sudden change of body. So what we call death, people get so disturbed by death, but Krishna is saying this is just a sudden change of body. You've been changing bodies. Death is just a sudden change in body. So if this process has been going on, then what makes us think that after death, we won't go into another body? If we have been changing bodies all this while, that means this sudden change will also lead the soul to go into another body. And therefore, a self-realized soul is not bewildered by such a change, he's saying. If we're self-realized, we won't be bewildered by it because we'll understand, well, This body just got too old, and now we're going to get another one. It's very interesting that even a small child in Vedic culture knew this philosophy. Prabhupada actually mentions this in one lecture. He says that how uh, even a simple child knew this philosophy. And some time back, many years ago, my grandfather passed away, and at that time, my cousin nephew, no, my cousin brother, sorry, he was there, and my grandfather had passed away, and my father and my uncle, they were all, crying, lamenting upon his passing, and they were lamenting for a few days, and after a while, my cousin brother, he got a little exasperated by the crying and the lamentation, and so he goes to my uncle and he says, "Don't cry, stop crying. Baba's car got very old, and so now he went to get a new car." And at that time, he was like 5, 6 years old. And my uncle and aunt at that time, they were not devotees. This was before they became devotees. But he knew this knowledge. It was there. It was well known that his car got old. And now he's gone to get a new car. And it's a fact, my grandfather, before he passed away, he had many health issues, which he was struggling for a long time. So as a very small child, he was saying, "Oh, what a relief. Now he's gone to get a fresh new body, a fresh new body." So we're so many things to discuss. So last point that I want to make, one more slide and then the final point where this is leading to. So in Eastern traditions in general, you'll find not just Bhagavad Gita, but even in Jainism, Sikhism, so many philosophies, they see time as cyclical. Life goes in cycles, right? The cycle, the soul, boyhood to youth to old age, and then again, boyhood to youth to old age. The self travels from one body to another, right? Like changing cars. Thus, an end signifies a new beginning. An end is not an end. An end is always the beginning of something else. This is a teaching that Krishna is giving in the second chapter, not just in terms of the soul and the body, but also in terms of life itself. Krishna tells Arjuna, "Matra sparshastu kaunteya shitoshna sukha dukkha agama paino nityastang satikshasva bharata." Right? He says, Arjuna, matra sparshastu kaunteya, that happiness and distress also come as winter and summer seasons. Don't be disturbed by them. Arise, O chastisers of the enemy. They come as winter and summer seasons. One must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. Because the end of distress is the beginning of happiness. The beginning of happiness is the end of distress. Even in Taoism, right, they say the yin and the yang. No situation is permanent in this world. It all goes in cycles. And therefore, an end signifies a new beginning. And this cycle of life is called samsara. The cycle of samsara is birth, disease, old age, and death. Birth, disease, old age, and death. So Krishna is giving this very deep knowledge of the soul. And while for us it may seem very ordinary, I still remember to this day, I took a college class in English. It was just a honors English class, very nice class. They were studying Shakespeare and all these things. And there was one paper that we were writing on, the conception of the self, conception of self in different philosophies. And as part of that discussion in that class, I said, how, one viewpoint is from the Bhagavad Gita, which says that we are the eternal self and how this body changes. And this body changes so often. This body changes so much. But we still are the eternal soul. We are eternal and we're, never ending, and life is eternal. And at that point, the the whole group, I remember they turned over and they said, wow, that was deep. That was really deep. Very, very profound. Where did you hear that? This is so profound. So this is the idea that that this knowledge is actually not available to so many people. This word samsara actually comes from the Sanskrit root srij. And srij means to flow, like a river flows. Srij means very fast flowing. Like when you go to India, if you go to the source of the Ganga, and there you go to Gangotri, you'll find that the Ganga is flowing so heavily from its source. That's srij, to flow very fast. It's so deep and it flows so fast that even if you throw a car into the river, you won't notice it. It's that big and it's that vast. The Ganga is the largest river in the world, comes straight from the Himalayas. So life is like that. It flows through. Nothing remains the same. And that is what life is. This is what the great sages called this world. Not permanence, not dependability, but flowing, constantly changing. And the only thing that is permanent in this impermanent cycle of samsara is the Atma, the eternal self, which does not change. So, final point, Krishna's teaching of the Atma is not a justification for violence. So Krishna is saying, the soul is eternal, so therefore fight, O Arjuna. No, there's a misunderstanding in reading the Gita in that way. Krishna is saying, Arjuna, the soul is eternal. Therefore, give up your attachment and therefore fight. The fact that people are eternal is not a justification for violence, because in the same chapter, Krishna speaks about the philosophy of karma and explains that karma, a person suffers if they don't do the right karma. But he's saying this person is an Atma, therefore give up attachment for the body. And once you are detached and you can see things in the right way, then see what your duty is in this circumstance and then fight. As we read in the first chapter, and also Krishna makes this point in the second chapter, violence is necessary in certain situations. For example, the 6 aggressors. When a person is an aggressor, that is, they're attacking you with weapons, or they're trying to set fire. In these cases, one must take up, paths. One must be violent to protect oneself, to, attack the aggressor. Violence is necessary when to protect the weak from the strong, when all good argument fails. Such a course of action is non-violence. So the justification for violence are these points that are mentioned in the Gita. And other points also, the main one being that Krishna desires this war. Krishna is instructing Arjuna to do this. And therefore, it's not being done whimsically. It's the direct will of Krishna himself, which we don't find ourselves in that situation. Arjuna did. But it's important to realize that, and important to make this point, that Krishna's teaching of the Atma is a separate topic. Now he's talking philosophy to bring Arjuna in the right conception of mind. And Krishna's teachings on when to fight and when not to fight are accompanying this knowledge. This knowledge is related with that. Just on this point that a person should fight to protect the weak from the strong when all good argument fails. This was very vividly illustrated in the Holocaust. The Holocaust in World War II. There were over 6 million Jews that were killed by Hitler, as we know. And many of the Jewish survivors, they make this very same point. And here we can understand, by understanding this, we can understand Arjuna's very deep responsibility here. Simon Wiesenthal, he is a Jewish survivor who wrote this book, The Sunflower. It's a very heart-wrenching book where he describes the torture, the mistreatment that the Jews went through. They would put thousands of Jews in gas chambers, separate the men from the women and from the children, take all the children, put them in a gas chamber, and gas it and kill them. And that was, just the final point. But leading up to that point, they would have them work in these concentration camps where they were living amidst their own stool and urine. They had no clothes. They would force them to be naked and work naked as a way of destroying their human sense of self-esteem and identity. And at that time, many of these people were thinking that it's not just Hitler who is the culprit here, but also all those who stand by silently and who don't oppose it, who don't fight for it. Here's a quote from him. He says, "I asked myself if it was only the Nazis who had persecuted us. Was it not just as wicked for people to look on quietly and without protest at human beings enduring such shocking humiliation?" So, here's a person who himself in that situation is making this point that to look on quietly is an equal sin. And Krishna's telling Arjuna, you must fight. After giving the knowledge of the soul, then in the second part, he says, you must fight on religious principles. People will scorn your name, that you're a Kshatriya and you're not fighting on religious principles, fighting for the good of people, simply out of attachment for your family members. Many Holocaust scholars believe that those who were following orders to torture and kill the 6 million Jews were just as guilty as those who gave them. Not only did Hitler have blood on his hands, but also all the countries who stood by silently watching the carnage. It's a fact that many countries had already known about this. They knew about this before they actually acted. They acted very late. They knew that this was going on, but they stood by silently due to their animosity towards the Jews as well. And so it is not so simple to be detached. And in the cloak of Arjuna's detachment and compassion is also a form of attachment, where he's attached not to fighting. He's attached not to doing his duty. And Krishna is therefore removing that attachment by giving him the knowledge of the soul. Very important point that a desire to do something is a form of attachment, but also the aversion to doing something is also a form of attachment, right? I'm attached to, let's say, taking a morning walk, but I'm also attached to not cleaning the bathroom. So my detachment to not cleaning the bathroom is a form of attachment, right? So not doing something is also a form of attachment, and that attachment was stopping Arjuna from doing the right thing. So I'll stop at this point. Chapter 2 is actually, it's the one chapter that's very difficult to cover in one session because it's so vast. So I apologize if this was a little too much, maybe. And so much I still didn't cover. I have like about 10, 15 more slides. But at this point, I'm going to stop here and open it up for discussion, for questions. I know many of you have questions and general discussion. Any questions or comments? Please, Rohan, Prabhu, unmute yourself.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. This is Shilpi here.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. So just wanted to say, first of all, this is such a complex subject matter, as you mentioned. And I mean, this is one of my favorite topics, reincarnation, because it comes very, very close to science. There has been so much of scientific research on reincarnation, about near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, past life regressions. So my question was, I mean, it can be a little technical, but only if you have more details on that. That when a near-death experience happens, the soul is out of the body. So, but it still observes everything what's happening. Usually, people who have who are in last stage of cancer or going through some very critical ailment or in ICU, at that time they experience this, but the soul can see and the soul can observe at that time. So is soul also having senses to perceive things, or I mean, can you explain it a little bit?
Yes, no, thank you for this very nice question, actually. It very nicely demonstrates the very point that I was trying to make. Near-death experiences and past life remembrances and out-of-body experiences are serving as arguments for the existence of the soul. Even in modern scientific research, in philosophical research, this has become an area of study. More and more is being published on it. The reason being because it's become so popular. Out-of-body experiences are becoming more and more popular. Why? Because of the advances in modern medicine. So in modern medicine, now they're doing, heart transplants, brain transplants, where a person is clinically dead, yet they sort of revive that person after draining the blood from their body. And so people are surviving things that normally they would not have survived, which means that during that time, the soul is doing something. And when the body is clinically dead, the soul sometimes thinks, oh, I need to leave this body, I'm dead. But then it realizes, no, the body is alive, so it comes back inside. So the phenomena that's going on that they cannot explain, and that helps so much in this argument, is that they say that there's like this person hovering above the body, looking down at the body. And people who survive that experience, they come back to tell the doctors what they were doing at that time, which is very eerie to the doctors because the patient was dead at that time. So they'll come back and say, thank you, nurse, for saving my life. They'll recognize the nurses who are working there. Or there's even a court case that happened where a nurse was mistreating a patient while the surgery was going on. And after that, the person came back and said, I saw you do this. Why did you do this? And they were doing a court case. So in this case, what is happening? According to the Gita, it is the soul with the subtle body, not just the soul, but the soul with the subtle body that is hovering above the body and looking down on it. And so because the soul is not fully liberated at that time, it's not just the soul, but it's the soul with the subtle body of mind, intelligence, and false ego. Now, on this question that you asked in terms of the soul and the senses, this is a big topic, a technical topic. How to explain this, that in this world, like this. So in this world, there are certain irreducible things. When I ask you, what is an atom? Right? What is an atom? Then you'll say an atom is a proton, a neutron, and an electron. Then I'll ask you, what is an electron? You say, well, an electron is it's a particle. So I say, well, what is it? So, well, what is a particle? An electron particle. And they say, well, it's a particle that has a certain mass, it has a certain charge, and it flies at a certain speed. So at a certain point, you cannot divide it further. All you can do is describe it. You can say, these are the qualities of this irreducible element, which is the electron, right? We all have experience of this. At a certain point, things in this world, you describe other things using those things, but you cannot break down those things further. So one could say that an electron is a fundamental particle of this world that cannot be divided further. In the same way, the soul is a fundamental particle of this world that cannot be divided further. And although, like the electron, it has attributes, like the electron has a negative charge, it has a certain speed, all these things. Although the soul has attributes that it thinks, it feels, and it wills, you cannot break the soul further into parts. Krishna says, the soul is unbreakable, insoluble, never burned. Right in the second chapter. Why is he saying that? Because it's an irreducible particle. So the soul has all the qualities. It is, it is thoughtful. It has desires, all these things. But those are intrinsic to the soul. There's no mind-soul difference within the soul. Whereas in terms of material things, these are things that we get upon ourselves. We identify with them. They're not truly us. Our feelings of anger are not truly us. Our feelings of anxiety are not truly us. And we can give those things up because they are not us. So thank you very much for that nice question. Um,
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Next question by Gopal Govinda Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you for illustrating all these facts. Question is in the same lines of thought. Soul has its own desires, eternal desires. Even in the spiritual world, soul carries these desires. Um, while the soul is trapped in this body or the subtle body, why the soul is not able to manifest its desires in the rightful manner, and so much conditioned with this body. You're mute, Prabhu.
Very nice question. Thank you. So the mind is traveling with the soul, we said, right? We said at the time of death, the soul that is not liberated transfers from one physical body to another with the subtle body. And the soul that is liberated, liberation doesn't mean a change of body, it means burning off the physical body and also the subtle body, burning it off, and only what's left is the soul, which is a spiritual form, a spiritual body. The soul is a spiritual body. So in terms of when we change bodies, the material mind is coming with us. But like you're saying, our memories are not coming with us. The memories don't stay. But what does stay, the reason why the soul is improving, are the impressions on the mind. So the impressions stay. There's verses in the Bhagavatam which say this, that the vasanas, the vasanas that we develop in one life continue on into the next life. This is why two brothers will be born in the same family, but one brother will be same education, same environment, same family. One brother will be very careful and will never touch drugs, but the other brother may experiment with drugs. Why the difference? Because one brother brought a certain vasana from his past life. He had already experienced it in his past life. Therefore, that impression was there. He said, never again. Never again, I won't do this. And the other brother did not experience it in a past life. And therefore, they're thinking, okay, I can experience it. Let's try it. Maybe it'll be okay. So the point being is that so many things in our day-to-day life, we don't remember them explicitly. They're not in our memory, but we have the impression of it on our consciousness. Yes, in chapter 15, Krishna also says this. We carry different conceptions of life. We can look at small children, right? Small children, they'll put their hand in the fan, right? They'll put the little hand in the fan, and it'll hurt them. Now, the next time around, they won't remember that experience. They have so many experiences. They're falling and tumbling everywhere. But they won't put their finger in the fan. Why? Because the impression is there. Though the memory is not there, the impression is there on the subtle mind. So this is why every life is a progress. This is why there's no, you could say there's no, actually, ultimately, the soul never backtracks. It's only progressing. Because every impression that we have, every mistake that we make, we learn from it. Though we don't remember it, we learn from it. And the soul learns from it. And that's why it is fair. The system of karma is fair because the soul learns and in this way progresses.
Hare Krishna. I have a question.
Okay. Your name, Prabhu?
Prabhakar, the last name. Okay. And question is that when my grandson, who was like 6 or 7 years old, their parents were expecting another child. So he knows the reincarnation. He read about it. He was spoken to, all that. He was ready. He was hoping that his younger brother would be reborn, George Washington.
I see.
He wanted to have him as his brother.
Yes.
So I don't know, when he was born, he didn't look or behave like that yet. He's still, my grandson is just 12 years. So how do we reconcile that? Are we supposed to be happy that somebody passing away and getting a new body, but we don't know, we will never meet him again? Is it an occasion to be happy or an occasion to lose a person you are so dear to? So this is my question.
So yes, a very nice question. Prabhupada says that many times we are reborn in the same family due to family attachment. So due to attachment to family, a relative, or a particular home, we can come back, and we can even come back as a mouse in that same home, Prabhupada says. So therefore, attachment is not good. Being reborn in this mature world is not a great success. We should be happy if someone is reborn in a very spiritual environment, which Krishna describes in the Gita later on, that how the unsuccessful yogi, due to their practice in spiritual life, they will be reborn in the family of devotees. So that is something that is very wonderful. Death is not freedom for the soul. Death is just the change of a dream. We go from one dream to another dream. But the dream world ends. The life of the dream ends when the dream world altogether finishes. We no longer have this mind covering us, this material mind, and we are a spiritual body, a spiritual person, and we realize our spiritual identity, and we return to the spiritual world. That is liberation, not simply when we change dreams. Very nice point. Ambika Mataji? You're next.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dandavat
Hare
Pranam.
Krishna. Dandavat
So
Pranam.
Prabhuji, my question is two-part, and thank you very much for explaining, the reincarnation and changing of bodies, the experiences about the death and all that. So actually, in fact, this is sort of a personal question also, but it's kind of related. That, my aunt, who is very dear to me, she is as good as my mom. I call her mom, and she's in India. She is given 24-hour. She's in very critical stage right now. So, maybe her soul can leave anytime. So obviously they are not in the devotees family. They are devotees, but they are not in Krishna consciousness. They follow, Pushti Marg Vaishnava. In this situation, and I am in Krishna consciousness for like last 10 years, so I understand the philosophy, but right now it's a test time. So I'm just thinking, how can I remember all this, whatever I have learned, and not lament if she leaves the body. And while she's still around, what can I do for her? What can I chant? What can I do? Pray. And at the same time, I suggested my cousin that, he should chant Narsimha prayer. They should chant Hare Krishna Mahamantra. She's in emergency, so, she cannot have tulsi beads around her neck. So I said, please make sure that she has tulsi beads around her neck. So what else I can do? What else I can advise them? And, how can I console myself?
Very nice question. Very nice point. Actually, in such situations, uh, in the spiritual culture, in the Vedic culture, the specific thing that is read is chapter 2. So this is particularly the knowledge that why this knowledge is so critical, which I was mentioning in the beginning, is because when this situation does hit us, this knowledge, this assurance from Krishna is what gives us so much happiness and relief. It can give us so much insight. And Krishna here is making the point. He's pointing out how how both for yourself and for your family members, for the relatives, for everyone around them. The only thing that can give us solace in this world is understanding the divine and the very wonderful nature of the soul. That how this soul, this Atma, is eternal, it is ever blissful, it is full of knowledge, it is full of bliss, and its ultimate home is to take shelter of Lord Krishna. Its ultimate residence, its ultimate place is to be under the shelter of Krishna. So you're doing everything exactly the way you should. That is the perfect way of doing it, is that at this point, the main thing is not to think of our grief. That is the mistake that we make, and the mistake that you're not making. The main point is not to think of our grief, but to think of how can I help this person in their journey? How can I help them right now and also in their journey by bringing them closer to Krishna so that they can actually reach the state where the soul wants to go? How can I give welfare for their soul? That is the main thing. And so this second chapter, it goes, we discuss primarily the discussion of the soul, but it goes from the soul all the way to devotional service. The last section of the second chapter is particularly focused on devotional service and the qualities of a self-realized soul. My talk was getting so long, so I didn't come to that point, come to this point. But here, this one, this here, there's 5 main sections to the second chapter. This is in your study guide. The first one, from text 1 to text 10, is Arjuna's doubts and his surrender to Krishna. Very beautiful. And you see here the mood of a disciple. The relationship of Arjuna and Krishna changes from a friend, he becomes a disciple. Then in the second part, he's talking about jnana. Krishna is speaking in response about jnana. So this is one part. So all these parts are handy in such a situation. First of all, be fixed in the knowledge, in the correct knowledge. There's no death for the soul. That is jnana. The third part is karma kanda. That by doing the right thing, you'll get, even materially speaking, you'll get material benefit. You'll get material prosperity. So perform your prescribed duties. For any reason, we should perform our prescribed duty. The fourth section is Buddhi Yoga. And this is very important. This is Buddhi Yoga. Srila Prabhupada translates as Bhakti Yoga, which is devotional service. It's the same. The commentators, Krishna himself, also make this point, that Buddhi Yoga means engaging our intelligence in the Lord's service, which is Bhakti Yoga. Nishkam Karma Yoga. Perform the right thing, perform your duty, but be detached from the fruit of its work. So otherwise, given the knowledge of the soul, Krishna immediately goes into that. This shows that why he's mentioning that knowledge, because now become detached from the body and detached from the fruit of one's work, and work simply as a service to the Lord. And the final one is Sthita Pragya. Come to the point of Samadhi. Not only should you work, not only should you act, but act while thinking of Krishna. Act while being equipoised. So it's not just enough to be a karma yogi. Like many Hindus, you'll speak to them, and when you're speaking of Gita, they'll say, oh, I'm a karma yogi. But Krishna's instruction is not being karma yogi. His instruction is, you perform karma and do it for me, and the only way you'll do it for me is if you are thinking of me. Your mind and senses are fixed in Krishna. So become fixed in Krishna consciousness by working in Bhakti Yoga. And there he describes the qualities of a great devotee. And one of the first qualities, which he repeats a few times in this chapter, is equal in all circumstances, equipoised in all circumstances, not concerned about happiness or distress, loss or gain. A person continues performing his duty in spite of all obstacles and in spite of all changes. So in such a situation, we have to perform our prescribed duty. We have to pray to the Lord. We have to pray to the Lord. And most foremost, we must we must meditate on how to help the soul and not grieve for the body. I hope this is helpful. It's, as I say, it's easier said than done, but these are some tips from the Bhagavad Gita.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Yeah, it is very helpful. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Sundari Gopi Mataji.
Yes, Prabhuji. Very wonderful class, Prabhuji. I'm very happy. Prabhuji, I had this question, in the Bhagavatam, it is given that anything that is beyond the experience of imperfect senses can be realized fully by sound representation. So I can experience, that is what the theory that I understand. I can experience fully Krishna through his sound of chanting. Is there any way that we can experience this soul also, or it is when we experience Krishna, we experience both? It is like a combo of us.
Yes, well, experiencing Krishna means experiencing the soul, and experiencing the soul means experiencing Krishna. Why is this? Because Srila Prabhupada says that you cannot see your hand unless you see the sun. Right? Seeing your hand means you see the sun. You cannot see the sun, the hand in darkness. And you cannot see the sun without seeing things around you. They both go hand in hand. So therefore, seeing the sun and seeing your hand both go hand in hand. We must remember this. So we cannot, through our material senses, we cannot understand the soul or Krishna. Please go ahead.
No, I was thinking in that way because it says that, when the sun falls, that when there is light, you see both together. So I was not sure, so I asked. So, can I share something?
Yes.
Because I was thinking about the soul part, and we cry when emotions come. But I heard a story where this Prabhu said that there was a hypnotist who had come to his community, and he showed a orange and said, "This is an onion." And he got a representative from the crowd and said, "Okay," so he hypnotized him. And this man was saying, "No, this is an orange." And this hypnotist was saying, "This is an onion." Then eventually, the volunteer started saying, "This is an onion." And then he said, "Okay, now peel it." So when he was peeling the orange, there are about tears in his eyes, because when you peel an onion, there are water comes from our eyes, and that is exactly what the mind does, or the false ego does on our soul. It hypnotizes us, and then we really connect to, something happens, and then we start emotionally connecting to it. But it is a hypnotic effect. But it is not a true this. I thought I should share. I try to use this when I feel very disturbed. Thank you.
Yes. No, this is a nice point. This is Maya, and this is Ahankar, misidentification, the false self. Right? We see one thing for another thing. We are actually the Atma, but due to the Ahankar, we think I am the body when I am the Atma. So Maya means that which is not, accepting one thing in place of another thing. Very nice. Jai Draupadi Mataji.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dandvat Pranam, Jai Srila Prabhupada. Prabhuji, I have a question. As soul is spiritual and everyone has soul, whether it's a devotee or non-devotee, and soul desire to serve Krishna, why the atheist not get enlightened for Krishna?
So the atheists have chosen to turn away from Krishna, from God. We all have. That's why we come to this material world. We have turned away from Krishna, and therefore, Krishna bhulya ji bhoga vancha kare. We've forgotten our eternal constitutional position as a friend, as a lover, as a servant of the Lord. And this process of the material world, that is our experience in the material world, is making us realize our false state of mind. It's making us understand that we have actually forgotten our true identity. And it's made us feel that, oh, now I am a prime minister, I am a president, I am I'm a student, or I'm a teacher, or I'm a mother or a father. So this is called Maya. This is called our ignorance. So by the experience of this mature world, we gradually come to our senses. We become frustrated from our mature things. So the atheist becomes frustrated and then eventually tries to seek the source of our existence, tries to seek out God, and then becomes a devotee in some lifetime or at some point, and then from there his spiritual life begins. So everyone in this mature world again is progressing, even the atheist is. And so many atheists we see towards the end of their life, they will turn to God, they'll become a devotee. I had one philosophy professor, and he was an atheist his whole life. But when he was on his deathbed, he became very afraid. And so he called all of his students, and he called my brother, some of his favorite students, just to meet them when he was in the hospital. He was going to die. And with my brother, he was joking and he was saying, I was praying to your Krishna. You talked about Krishna before. I was praying to him. And, I've understood everything in my life, but death, I'm still afraid of. I'm still afraid of death. And Krishna says this in the Gita, right? To those who don't surrender unto me, I come to them in the form of time. Time I am, the great destroyer. Right? So we can come to Krishna voluntarily out of love. And if we don't come to Krishna voluntarily, then Krishna comes to us as time. And as time, then he reveals himself to us. So very important point there, that ultimately even the atheist becomes a devotee of the Lord.
Okay,
Harinam
thank
Kirtan.
you.
Thank you.
Prabhuji.
Thank you. Harinam Kirtan, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam. Thank you so much for the wonderful class. My question is about the Ayu. Some people say when the person is born, his age is fixed, and there is another thought. The age depends on the number of breaths. So maybe could you please clarify that part? That is one question. And another is when a body leaves, when a soul leaves the body, and the Garud Puran says it takes antavahak sharir, antavahak body to travel, to the Yamraj, or to that many miles. They have to walk or whatever they have to do, depending on the. So again, it's again type of another body. You take it up. So we are just jumping into one body to another, wherever we are. And if you go to spiritual world, again another spiritual body. So maybe some clarification would be helpful.
Yes, thank you. These are nice questions. I'm not sure if I know the answers, but I'll try. So in terms of the number of breaths, that every person has a certain number of breaths, this is completely true. This is the cycle of karma, that we are all destined a certain duration of life. And therefore, we should not waste that life, because life is temporary. We have a certain number of deaths, and and we are destined to change our body after that. There's one philosophy professor who teaches at the university I teach here, and he's not a devotee. He's just a very good professor. And in his philosophy class, he actually begins with this. Even my point being, even everyone recognizes this. He says to his students, he says, we have 5,000 weeks to live. It's true. We have 5,000 weeks to live, right? And every year there's 50 weeks. And that's if we live 100 years. We have 5,000 weeks to live. And he says you can choose how to use each week that you have. It's counted, 5,000. You waste a week, right? We say, this week I didn't do much. That 1 week is gone. You have now 4,999 weeks left. And so many weeks have already passed in our youth and our childhood. So our destiny, our life is counted. And we should therefore take life very seriously. On the other hand, as a devotee, we may have a certain number of breaths destined. But once you become a devotee, due to devotional service, that can change. We still will have a limit, 5,000 weeks, 100 years. But let's say if we're only destined to live 50 years, after we become a devotee, that can change. And we actually see this practically in the life of devotees, that Devotees, for example, will get their astrological chart done. And it'll say, after 4 years, you're going to get a heart attack, or after 5 years, this is going to happen, that's going to happen. And those things don't happen in the life of a devotee. Rather, it'll be some smaller problem, some smaller thing. There's even amongst Shaiva devotees, there's a story where a Shiva devotee goes into a temple and he cleans. There's 2 devotees that go. I'm not sure the source of this story. Where does it come from? But there's 2 devotees. One devotee goes and he starts cleaning, and he's worshiping Shiva for some material gain. He wants some material benefit. So as he's cleaning the temple, he's thinking, Lord Shiva is going to be really happy with this, and I'm going to get what I want. And so he's cleaning the temple, and sure enough, while he cleans, he finds a gold coin. Someone has dropped it in the corner of the temple. He finds a gold coin. He looks at the gold coin. He says, the result of my seva is here. And he walks out and runs away with this gold coin. Another devotee of Shiva goes into the temple, and he's very devoted to Lord Shiva. He comes and does this seva of cleaning every week. And he does it just to please Lord Shiva. And so he's cleaning. And as he cleans, and he's cleaning so thoroughly, he cuts his thumb on a piece of glass, and blood is coming out. And he says, this must be the mercy of Lord Shiva. He ties up, his cut thumb, and then he walks away. So Mother Parvati on Kailash is looking down on this, and looking down meaning is seeing this from up there. And she asks Lord Shiva, he says, what is this? Your insincere devotee came and you gave him a gold coin. And your sincere devotee came and you gave him a cut on his hand. What is this? And Lord Shiva, to this he responds, he says, the first devotee came for wealth, so I gave him wealth. The second devotee came to offer his service to me. And actually, today he was supposed to die. He was supposed to come in a very, bad accident, something. He was supposed to die. But because he was serving me so nicely, I just gave him a little cut on the thumb. So the reason why I am telling you this story is because this idea of the number of breaths. It is true that we have a number of breaths that is destined, but in the case of a devotee, those number of breaths can change. And because in the life of a devotee, Krishna is personally involved in their life, so we don't have to worry about these things. We just have to serve Krishna, and Krishna will take care of us. That we know. Regarding your second question of the Garuda Puran, what I have read is that there's a linga rupa, that is a linga sharira, which is the subtle body, and that subtle body carries the soul from the current body to the hellish planets, if needed. And there in the subtle body, that soul suffers because that body doesn't die, it can suffer a lot. And then once that punishment is over, then the subtle body then carries it into its next body. That's what I've read, actually kind of read on the Garuda Puran, is that it speaks of a linga rupa, which is the same as the subtle body. So this body that you're speaking of may be the same as the subtle body. That's what I've heard.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Anand Mai Krishna Prabhu.
Haribol Prabhu, thank you so much for your class. So my question goes back to what Sundari Gopi Mataji was asking, and your answer to it, which is, if we realize the soul, we are realizing Krishna, and if you're realizing Krishna, we're realizing the soul, which is nothing but congruence. So my question is, there are some other movements, not the ISKCON, obviously we are devotees trying to be devotees and so on. So we understand the philosophy, but there are other movements which do talk about the soul, but they don't necessarily treat Krishna as a supreme personality, and treat some others as supreme personality. So what, if I can ask you, what would be your answer to that?
Very nice question, very subtle question that you asked. Yes, see, they are realizing the soul, but their realization is very limited. So they're realizing the soul, but really they're just realizing the glimmer of it, the light of it. Realizing the soul means, actually, true realization of the soul means realizing our spiritual identity, realizing the spiritual body, the spiritual form of the soul, and its eternal relationship with Krishna. It means realizing the soul means realizing our Swarupa. What is our eternal role in the spiritual world in relationship with Krishna? The personality of the soul, the feelings, the relationship. That is truly realizing the soul, not just it's a bright light, it's chit, it is knowledge, it is your sat, it is eternal. That is Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma. That is Brahman realization. But just like in the case of Krishna also, right, we say that how someone may be Brahman realized. They may realize God as the impersonal light, but that doesn't mean they realize Krishna fully. The same thing is also true of the soul. Someone may realize God as a light, as an energy, and be Brahman realized, a Brahmavadi. Brahmavadis are different than Mayavadis. Brahmavadis are attracted to the effulgence of the Lord, but they don't deny the personality of the Lord. It's just that they realize the impersonal effulgence of the Lord. Whereas the Mayavadis actually deny the personal aspect of the Lord. So Brahmavadis, they realize Brahman, like so many religions, philosophers, and they also feel a great sense of ecstasy, but they actually have not realized the full realization of the Lord. So if we truly realize the soul, we must realize Krishna, because the soul is inherently Jivera Sarup Krishnena Nityadas. The very identity of the soul is related with Krishna. The soul has no meaning, it has no existence without Krishna. It has no reality without Krishna. So it is impossible to understand the soul without understanding Krishna.
So they're partially realizing the soul, you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Just the effulgence, yeah.
Yeah. And so this question was more so related for people who would believe in some, supreme authority and, practice whatever they're practicing. What about, I don't want to name, but what about some organizations where, you know, okay, let's speak about it. Osho, for example, they, they say that he was also a liberated soul, doing what or teaching what he was teaching. Prabhu, what would be your take on that? And this is again, I mean, these two questions for it's more out of curiosity than anything else.
Yes,
it's not from the path, but
it's a good question, and actually very I've considered this thought before, and all these people who you see who become very influential, you could say very powerful, they have some mystic power in them, some realization in them, due to which they influence others. Like even you see like Satya Sai Baba and these things, people say that he does miracles. And most likely it's true, he does do miracles. So these individuals, depending on who they are and to the different degree, and we don't know, I cannot speak for any of them, but they are on different levels of realization, different levels of self-realization. Maybe someone has realized, is Brahman realized, but not Bhagavan realized. Another theme of the second chapter, very important in the purport, Prabhupada talks about the three levels of realization. So Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. So Brahman realized, or like that. Someone may, like in the Yoga Sutras, it says, if you're on the path of yoga, you'll get mystic powers. But then the Yoga Sutra says, but don't become entranced by these mystic powers. Because if you pursue these, then you will lose the ultimate goal of yoga, which is realization of the absolute truth. So they become very successful and they get mystic powers, and then they get sidetracked. And then you see they get so much following, but then they may fall down or not become fully realized. So long story short, they have some genuinity in them. They have some power in them. That's why they get where they're at. But they haven't reached perhaps the ultimate goal, which is Krishna. They stop, they get sidetracked. They become enamored by their own power, and that can be a stumbling.
So their so-called liberation is not real liberation, what people say, that they are liberated.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Thank you, bro. Haribol. Thank you.
Thank you.
Answering these
Very
questions.
much. Yes, thank you. Last Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhuji, my question is about playing the system. So you spoke about how we carry impressions from this life to the next life through our mind. Now, I have taken to the practice of devotional service, but I don't think, I will perfect my devotional service at the end of this life. So I'll have to come back again, take another life and continue my devotional service. But there is no guarantee. And that's why they say that you should try to perfect it in this lifetime itself. Because let's say if you are thinking about the next lifetime, then you might not take it up again. I mean, you get birth in a bigger family and all that, a rich family, but you might not take up to devotional service again. So my question was, are there some potent forms of devotional service through which you can actually give so whatever so in this lifetime I have taken that I made that determination that I'm going to practice devotional service. Now this determination, is there any way that I can have that as an impression on my mind so that I can carry it in my next life and continue? So are there some very potent forms of devotional service that can help me do that?
Very nice question. And this is one of the reasons I started with that verse. Those two verses you may remember. The first one was Neha Vikramanasha Asti Pratyavayuna Vidyate, which is on this path, there's no loss or diminution. Even a little advancement on this path can save one from the greatest type of fear. Why does Krishna say this? Because in our next life, let's say we don't make it in this life, in our next life, whatever devotional service we do, it can save us years of wasting time, years of suffering, years of difficulty, because that seed of bhakti, those impressions are already planted in our heart. So there's no, you could say, it's very exceptionally sort of special forms of devotional service that leave impressions on the heart. The point is, any devotional service, if it is devotional service, will leave an impression on the heart, because it's directly related with the soul. Devotional service is a service of the soul. It's the relationship between the soul and Krishna. So that service stays with us always. If we get a PhD, as Prabhupada says, and we're 1 week short of completing it, that PhD we will never get. It will be of no use to us. If we get a PhD in this life, in our next life, we'll have to do the whole PhD all over again. It's completely useless. In our next life, that PhD is completely useless for us. But in spiritual life, whatever bhakti we do, those impressions stay with us. And we start from where we left off. There's no loss or diminution on this path. Krishna is confirming it. If we do Bhakti Shastri and we stop at chapter 4, there's no loss, there's only gain. We'll continue from chapter 5 the next time we start spiritual life. So there's no loss on this path. Everything stays with the soul. All the impressions do.
Thank you.
Nice. Thank you. Harinam Kirtan Prabhu. You already. Okay, your hand was up, so that's why I was alert. Okay, so any final questions, comments? We're actually right on time. I want to end at 11 o'clock. It seems like, because we're only meeting once a week, it seems like, practically speaking, our sessions will be 2 hours long. Exactly 2 hours, I think, is enough to cover all the material that we want to cover. As I mentioned, chapter 2 is so vast that there are many things that I could not cover in the lecture. There's some sections that I emphasize more, and other sections that I do not cover. However, your homework will cover it all. So your homework will ask questions from each section, and you won't have any. You'll cover all the material. Also, the study guide is very useful. So please also read through that. And whatever you do, please, even if you don't have time to read all the purports, everyone should read all the purports. But just knowing the reality that I know some people won't. It's just we have children and families. please read through all the translations, read through all the verses, and meditate on these verses. As I mentioned, chapter 2 goes from the knowledge of the soul all the way to pure devotional service. It's a very special chapter. It also describes the qualities of the great devotee. It describes how we can be happy in every situation. The nature of a pure devotee, you could say the steadiness, the determination of a great devotee. It's a full summary, and that's why it's very hard. It's like every verse is almost a different topic, and it's a full summary of the entire Gita. So thank you for your very kind attention, and it's always wonderful to have your association. And if you have any questions, you can always email me or chat.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank
Hare
you.
Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
Hare
Thank you.
Krishna, Hare Bol.
Hare
Prabhuji,
Krishna.
Hare
Thank
Krishna.
you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Bol.
Thank you,
Thank
Prabhuji.
you.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna,
Hare Krishna.
Prabhuji.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.